The first alert did not sound like war. It sounded like a minor glitch in a system that had been running too long without sleep. A flat, sterile tone echoed inside the tactical operations shelter just after 2:13 in the morning. Red lights washed over rows of consoles and tired faces. For half a second, I considered the most ordinary explanation. We ran simulations every week. False spikes happened. Software hiccups happened. Real war did not usually begin with something so unimpressive. Then Chief Warrant Officer Aaron Caldwell's voice cut clean through the dim glow. "Ma'am, I have multiple confirmed launches. Bearing 048. This is not clutter." She did not raise her voice. She did not repeat herself. She did not need to. My stomach did not drop. It locked tight like a hatch sealing under pressure. I stepped forward to the radar display. The screen was no longer showing a single anomaly. It was alive with movement. Red arcs climbed from the northeast in tight formation. Not one missile. Not two. A coordinated salvo. "I am Captain Alexandra Mercer, United States Army Air Defense Artillery, Battery Commander for Alpha Battery. We had rehearsed this scenario for months under fluorescent lights, dry erase boards, and time drills that shaved seconds off response windows. But rehearsals do not show you the faces of the soldiers asleep less than 5 miles behind your launchers. Rehearsals do not place thousands of lives on a countdown clock. Confirmed trajectory," I ordered. Specialist Lauren Bishop's fingers moved fast across her console, eyes locked on projected impact patterns. Confirmed ballistic profile. Estimated impact zone logistics hub and adjacent troop housing. The words were clinical. The meaning was not. Thousands of Americans were sleeping in those buildings: mechanics, pilots, infantry, support staff, young privates on their first deployment, senior NCOs who had done this too many times, all of them unaware that red lines were descending toward them. I keyed the battalion net, steadying my voice before it carried beyond our shelter. "Valkyrie 6, this is Guardian 1. We have confirmed inbound ballistic threats. Multiple tracks, request weapons, release." There was no chaos on a frequency, no shouting, just the faint sound of breathing and distant equipment hum. Then Major Catherine Doyle answered, controlled and immediate. "Guardian 1, you are weapons free. Protect the force." Authority flowed the way it was designed to flow, no hesitation, no theatrics. I shifted my eyes to the countdown timer. 38 seconds to intercept window. In air defense, that is both a lifetime and nothing at all. Fire control, engage. Staff Sergeant Morgan Blake's voice came back steady. Engaging. Outside, the first interceptor ignited with a violent white flare that turned night into brief daylight. The launcher rocked under the force. The missile climbed fast, a spear of light arcing upward to meet what most of the base still did not know was coming. On the screen, blue lines met red. Silence in the shelter except for clipped confirmations. Interceptor tracking. Guidance stable. Closing. For a heartbeat, the entire world narrowed to intersecting lines and math. Then the first flash bloomed high above the desert. One inbound threat destroyed. No one cheered. There was no time. Because even as debris fell harmlessly into empty sand, Lauren's voice came again, tighter now. Additional cluster detected. Multiple new launches. Same bearing. I looked back to the radar. The screen was filling. This was not a single strike meant to send a message. This was layered. Deliberate. Another interceptor launched. Then another. The sky outside turned violent white in intervals, like lightning striking upward instead of down. Shockwaves thudded through the thin desert air. Inside, my soldiers remained disciplined. Aaron recalculated vectors in real time. Morgan adjusted launch sequencing. Danielle Cross moved behind the younger specialists, one steady hand on a shoulder here, a quiet word there. Stay on your task. Trust the system. But as the second radar cluster expanded, I understood something heavier than fear. This was not an opening statement. It was phase 1. And somewhere beyond our sector, other batteries were seeing their own red arcs climb. War had not arrived in a speech or a headline. It had arrived in seconds. And we were already in it. 3 months before the first missile ever touched our radar scope, life at Camp Ardent Resolve ran on discipline so tight it felt mechanical. Not comfort. Not ease. Precision. Alpha Battery, 3rd Battalion Air Defense Artillery existed for one purpose: detect, track, and destroy airborne threats before they reached American forces. On paper, that mission fits neatly into a single sentence. In reality, it means living in a constant state of calculated readiness. We were positioned outside a sprawling logistics hub in northern Kuwait. Every night, convoys rolled in and out like clockwork, Cargo planes lifted into the dark sky. Helicopters staged for early morning missions. Thousands of service members slept in modular housing just beyond our defensive arc. Mechanics, intelligence teams, aviation crews, infantry elements rotating through theater. If we failed, it would not be a headline. It would be a crater in the center of American lives. At 1900 hours every evening I walked the line. Not ceremonially, not casually. I inspected launcher rails, ran my hand along cold metal canisters, verified serial numbers against logs, reviewed radar calibration sheets, and asked quiet questions that required confident answers. I did not do it because I doubted my soldiers. I did it because command responsibility is personal. If something slipped through, it would not be the battery's failure. It would be mine. Chief Warrant Officer Erin Caldwell treated her radar system like a living organism. She knew its moods. She could tell when a minor fluctuation was atmospheric clutter and when it hinted at something more serious. 21 years in uniform had trained her instincts sharper than any software update. I once asked her what kept her sharp after so many uneventful nights. She said, "Because the sky only has to betray you once." Staff Sergeant Morgan Blake ran fire control with quiet authority. She drilled her crew until engagement sequences felt automatic. Launch confirmation, track verification, backup sequencing, manual override. She shaved response times down by tenths of seconds as if those fractions were currency. When I told her she was relentless, she didn't smile. "When the real one comes, ma'am," she said, "thinking is too slow." Sergeant First Class Danielle Cross kept the formation tight. She didn't shout. She didn't posture. She corrected with calm precision and expected immediate adjustment. Standards were not suggestions in her platoon. Specialist Ava Collins, our youngest intelligence analyst, sat in front of multiple feeds every day, reviewing satellite imagery, regional launch sites, communications chatter. She rarely offered speculation. When she spoke, it was because she had corroboration. We were not a novelty. We were not an experiment. We were a combat formation. There were whispers from passing units sometimes, surprise at female leadership across key positions, curiosity masked as politeness. We didn't engage in debates. We trained. Because deterrence does not depend on opinions, it depends on readiness. In the weeks leading up to the attack, the indicators grew sharper. Increased encrypted traffic across known missile units. Satellite imagery showing activity near hardened launch sites. Diplomatic language hardening on every side. Nothing overt enough to trigger preemptive action, but enough to tighten the air. 2 weeks before the first salvo, Brigade Commander Colonel Rebecca Shaw called me into her command tent. Maps covered one wall. Digital overlays flickered with regional assessments. "If they go," she said without preamble, "it will be fast. Saturation, not symbolism." I nodded. "We're ready." She studied me for a long moment, not evaluating rank, evaluating certainty. "Be certain," she said. That conversation stayed with me longer than I admitted. Readiness in air defense is a strange burden. You spend most of your time preparing for something you hope never comes. You rehearse intercept geometry. You practice degraded operations in case of equipment failure. You simulate worst-case scenarios until they feel routine. But beneath the routine is a quiet, steady awareness. If it starts, it will not ease in. It will not give you time to warm up. It will not respect the hour. The night the first missile lifted off its launch rail, we were not shocked by hostility. We were shocked by how ordinary the moment felt right before everything changed. War rarely announces itself with drama. It arrives during a normal shift, and it expects you to already be ready. The first interceptor left the rail exactly as designed. Clean ignition, stable climb, perfect telemetry. Then the second followed, rising into the dark like a controlled bolt of lightning. Inside the shelter, Staff Sergeant Morgan Blake's voice carried steady across the internal net. Interceptor 1 tracking, Interceptor 2 acquiring, no strain, no hesitation. On the radar screen, blue arcs curved upward to meet descending red lines, geometry and timing, math written in motion. Time to intercept 8 seconds. Lauren called out. The numbers fell 6, 4. The entire shelter seemed to breathe in unison. Then the screen flashed white. 2 inbound threats destroyed. Debris signatures scattered harmlessly across empty desert grid squares. But 3 red arcs remained. Additional launches detected. Chief Warrant Officer Erin Caldwell said, her eyes locked on the expanding threat picture. Multiple vectors. Bearing spread increasing. This is coordinated. That was the moment routine ended. Up until then, this could have been a punitive strike. A limited retaliation meant to send a message, but the vectors told a different story. This was saturation. They were testing not just our interceptors, but our timing, our discipline, our seams. I keyed the battalion frequency again. Guardian 1 reporting expanded threat envelope. Multiple inbound across secondary azimuth. Request engagement authority beyond primary sector. The answer came without delay. Guardian 1, authority granted. Major Catherine Doyle replied. Adjacent batteries aligning coverage. Deconflict through Sector 2-3. That confirmation mattered. Air defense sectors are carefully drawn. Engage too early and you risk crossing into another battery's intercept lane. Engage too late and you leave a corridor open. Precision prevents fratricide. Precision prevents impact. Adjusting engagement priorities, Morgan said calmly. Sequencing next two interceptors. The third interceptor ignited. For half a second, the launcher hesitated. A subtle mechanical stutter. Inside the shelter, no one moved, then Morgan's voice cut through. Launch fault. Recycle sequence. Switching to backup launcher. It was a half-second delay. In training, that is an inconvenience. In combat, it is an eternity. On the radar, one red arc continued descending unchecked. Time to terminal phase 12 seconds, Lauren said, voice tightening. If that missile crossed our designated intercept line, it would clear our outer defense arc and descend toward troop housing. I didn't wait for the automatic sequence to reset. Fire backup immediately. I ordered. Override delay. There was risk in that call. Reduced recalibration time. Tighter margin for guidance correction, but waiting meant impact. The backup launcher roared. The interceptor climbed hard, cutting across the sky. Inside the shelter, the only sound was breathing and quiet confirmations. Tracking. Guidance stable. Closing. 3 seconds. 2. The flash came brighter this time, almost violent. Destroyed. The red arc vanished. But relief did not have time to form, because Aaron's voice changed. New cluster detected. Multiple launches. Different trajectory profile. Higher apogee. I looked back at the screen. More red arcs were rising. Not from the same launch points. This was layered. Timed. Deliberate escalation. This is no demonstration, Morgan said under her breath. She was right. This was not a warning shot. It was a system designed to overwhelm. The air outside cracked again as another interceptor launched. Then another. Our coverage grid was expanding. Adjacent batteries were engaging simultaneously. Blue and red lines intersected across multiple sectors like a violent constellation. I felt the weight settle in. We were no longer reacting to an opening strike. We were inside the first phase of a campaign. Maintain posture, I ordered. No gaps. Because once you commit to engagement at this level, there is no stepping back. Every intercept changes the board. Every launch confirms you are fully in the fight. And as the fourth wave formed on the edge of our radar envelope, I understood something with absolute clarity. The night was not spiraling out of control. It was unfolding exactly as someone had planned. And we were now fully committed to stopping it. The second wave did not mirror the first. It adapted. The new inbound tracks appeared lower and faster on the screen, their flight paths compressed, their descent angles sharper, shorter, range ballistic profiles. Less time from detection to intercept, harder geometry, smaller margins. They were tightening the window. New trajectories confirmed, Aaron said, fingers moving across her console as she recalculated tracking solutions in real time. Reduced apogee, time to intercept significantly shortened. Morgan was already adjusting sequencing, coordinating with Sector 2-3 and 2-4, staggering launches to prevent overlap. Every intercept had to be deliberate. If two batteries fired into the same slice of sky without coordination, guidance systems could interfere. A fraction of a second misaligned, and either you risked collision or left a corridor open. Outside, the desert sky was no longer black. White streaks cut upward in disciplined arcs. High above, controlled explosions bloomed like brief artificial suns. Shockwaves rolled faintly across the flat terrain. Inside the shelter, Sergeant First Class Danielle Cross moved between stations without raising her voice. Eyes on your scopes. Breathe. Trust the math. No theatrics, no panic. Just discipline holding the line. On the radar, the second wave began to thin. One red arc disappeared, then another, but not all of them. Track deviation detected, Lauren said quietly. A single inbound missile had shifted slightly off the projected pattern, its descent vector angled toward a narrow seam between our assigned coverage arc and the outer range of a sister battery. A gap measured in degrees, measured in seconds. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Everyone in that shelter understood what that seam meant. If neither battery engaged, the missile would pass untouched. If both engaged without coordination, we risked crossing guidance paths. I did the calculation in my head before the software could finish it. Guardian 1 engaging outside assigned arc. I transmitted over the battalion net. It was my call. If that intercept failed, it would be reviewed, questioned, dissected. But hesitation would not be. Engaging, Morgan confirmed. The launcher ignited. The interceptor climbed hard, cutting across sector boundaries. Halfway through ascent, the inbound track fragmented. Separation event, Aaron said sharply. Possible decoy deployment. On the screen, multiple smaller signatures bloomed around the primary arc, scattering like shrapnel. For a split second, the guidance system hesitated between targets. Aaron leaned forward, voice precise. Primary warhead remains center mass. Ignore peripheral signatures. Maintain track on original velocity profile. Morgan adjusted manually, trimming the guidance solution by fractions. Correcting. The two arcs converged. Silence. Then the flash. The primary warhead disintegrated high above the desert. The decoys fell away. Harmless. I exhaled slowly, realizing I had been holding my breath. But relief did not settle, because the brigade net came alive again. Colonel Rebecca Shaw's voice carried across every battery in the sector. All units maintained defensive posture. Intelligence assessing potential follow-on retaliation. Expect continued activity. There was no victory in her tone. Just anticipation. Which meant this was not the end of the exchange. This was a probing escalation. Inside the shelter, fatigue began to creep in around the edges. We had been operating at full intensity for hours. Adrenaline masks exhaustion, but it does not erase it. I looked at my team. Eyes red but focused, hands steady but tighter now. Rotate water, I ordered. Micro, breaks by section. No lapse in coverage. A war tests endurance as much as reaction. Another faint radar spike flickered at the edge of detection range. We adjusted posture instantly. The sky outside remained streaked with fading smoke trails, evidence of threats that had almost reached American soil in this theater. The night had grown louder, brighter, heavier. And beneath the controlled cadence of reports and confirmations, a simple truth was settling in. They were not testing our equipment anymore. They were testing our stamina. And we were still standing. At 3:40 in the morning, the radar went quiet, not gradually, completely. For 90 seconds, the screen showed nothing but empty grid lines and steady system indicators, no red arcs, no warning tones, just the low hum of equipment and the faint sound of breathing inside the shelter. 90 seconds can feel like relief. It can also feel like accusation. That is when doubt tries to move in. Did we misclassify a track? Did one slip through at low altitude? Did a separation event hide a surviving warhead beneath debris signatures? I watched the scope without blinking. Confirm overhead? I said. Specialist Ava Collins was already cross, referencing satellite feeds and regional thermal imaging. Negative secondary launch plumes, she reported. No additional heat signatures from known sites. Current assessment pause in launch activity. A pause, not an end. We had stopped the first phase. The shelter did not erupt. No one leaned back in their chair. No one unclenched completely. Because in air defense, silence is never trust. It is uncertainty. Until that moment, we had been reacting to what was thrown at us. Identifying, calculating, engaging. But something shifted in me during that quiet stretch. If we waited for the next spike to tell us what they were doing, we would always be half a step behind. I called my section leads forward. We gathered around the central display, red light casting sharp shadows across tired faces. They tested our response window. I said evenly, first wave high arc, second wave lower profile. Decoy fragmentation introduced mid-flight. Erin folded her arms, studying the blank grid. They'll adjust trajectory angles next, she said. Maybe stagger altitude bands to complicate tracking. Morgan nodded once. Or compress timing. Launch clusters closer together. Force sequencing stress. Danielle Cross stood slightly behind them. Fatigue becomes a factor, she added. They know we've been engaged for hours. They were right. War adapts. It studies your rhythm. It looks for hesitation. We began recalibrating immediately. Intercept priorities adjusted to anticipate lower flight paths. Engagement hesitation thresholds tightened by fractions of seconds. Launcher sequencing reorganized to eliminate the half-second gap that had nearly cost us earlier. We rehearsed the adjustment live, not because we had failed, but because survival in combat depends on refusing to be comfortable with your last success. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten at the edges. A faint gray line stretched along the horizon. With daylight came reports. An installation farther south had not reached full defensive posture before the first wave struck. One missile penetrated their coverage window. Casualties confirmed. The transmission came through battalion net, clinical and controlled. Numbers. Impact coordinates. Damage assessment pending. Not ours, but American. I felt the weight settle deeper into my chest. Every intercept we had made mattered. Every half-second we had shaved from our response time mattered. But somewhere else, timing had not aligned. Someone else had paid. I looked around the shelter at my soldiers. Erin's jaw set tight. Morgan's hands resting on her console, ready. Ava staring at updated intelligence feeds with new intensity. This was no longer about proving readiness. It was about ensuring the next wave did not find us recalculating again. They will come back, I said quietly. No one disagreed. The next wave will not catch us adjusting. There was no defiance in the statement, just certainty. The radar remained quiet for the moment, but now we were not waiting. We were prepared for how they would try to break us next. At 1817 hours, just as the desert light began to soften toward evening, Brigade Intelligence pushed a short, controlled update across the net. Potential final barrage activity. Launch sites showing limited preparation signatures. Limited. That word carries weight in combat. It means something is moving, but not enough to predict scale. By then, my soldiers had been awake and operating at full intensity for nearly 16 hours. Adrenaline can carry you far, but fatigue always waits patiently behind it. Fatigue dulls judgment. It slows reaction by fractions. And in air defense, fractions decide outcomes. I studied my team without saying anything. Erin's eyes remained fixed on her scope, posture forward, unblinking. Morgan's hands hovered near her controls, not tense, not loose, ready. Ava's attention moved between lev feeds and thermal overlays with deliberate precision. No one was drifting. No one was careless. Still, I felt the pressure settle differently now. The earlier waves had been coordinated saturation. Clear intent, clear targets. This time, it felt measured. Then the radar chirped. A single spike. New launch detected, Erin said immediately. High altitude profile. Bearing 046. Only one. The arc climbed higher than previous waves. Slower ascent. Different telemetry signature. Trajectory irregular, Erin continued. Possible reconnaissance platform. Possible modified payload. Cannot confirm. Uncertainty is heavier than saturation. With multiple inbound threats, you engage without hesitation. With one ambiguous track, you must choose. If it was reconnaissance and we engaged, escalation optics would follow. If it carried a warhead and we held, we risked impact. Time to potential intercept window. I asked. 10 seconds. Morgan answered. 10 seconds to weigh escalation against risk. 10 seconds to decide whether this was a message or a weapon. I thought about the housing blocks still occupied, the convoy yard preparing night operations, the installation farther south that had taken casualties because readiness windows had not aligned. Hesitation can feel responsible. Sometimes it is fatal. Guardian 1 engaging. I transmitted calmly. I ordered internally. The interceptor roared into the sky. Its ascent was slightly steeper than earlier engagements, adjusting for the higher arc. Mid-flight, the guidance system flagged instability. Target maneuvering, Erin said sharply. Manual correction required. She shifted control, trimming guidance parameters by hand. No wasted motion, no dramatic breathing. Outside, the two arcs converged against a fading blue sky. Inside, silence pressed against our ears. 3 seconds. 2. The flash came high, almost at the edge of detection range. Fragments dispersed. No secondary descent signatures. Erin confirmed first. Target neutralized. No debris tracked toward ground. The shelter did not erupt. It exhaled. Minutes later, Brigade Net carried the words everyone had been waiting for. AL units stand by for sector-wide assessment. No additional launch indicators at this time. Then, finally, AL, clear. The first day of war had ended, not with celebration, not with speeches, but with a quiet understanding. We had faced saturation, we had faced uncertainty. We had chosen when to act, and we were still standing. The official assessment came through just before night, fully settled back over the desert. Alpha Battery had intercepted every inbound threat that entered our sector across 3 coordinated waves. No penetration. No structural damage inside our grid. No American lives lost under our coverage arc. The logistics hub remained operational. Aircraft still staged. Convoys still prepared to move. Thousands of service members would wake up the next morning unaware of how close the sky had come to breaking open above them. That was the measure of success. Not headlines. Absence. I removed my headset slowly, aware for the first time of how heavy it felt. My shoulders ached from tension I hadn't acknowledged. The shelter still hummed with system checks and after-action logging, but the violent urgency had faded into controlled assessment. I stepped outside. The desert air felt cooler than it had that morning. Overhead, faint smoke trails still scarred the sky, pale gray streaks dissolving into darkness. High above, debris from intercepted missiles had burned itself out long before touching the ground. Evidence of violence that never reached its target. That is what air defense looks like when it works. Colonel Rebecca Shaw approached from the command vehicle, her posture as steady as it had been all day. "Well done, Captain." No raised voice. No dramatic handshake. Just a simple acknowledgement between professionals who understood what had been at stake. "Yes, ma'am," I replied. She studied the fading trails overhead for a moment, then looked back toward the shelter where my battery was already resetting systems. "You maintained discipline," she said. "That's what held." Then she moved on to her next responsibility. There was no ceremony waiting for us, no gathering of cameras. War does not pause for applause. I turned back toward the shelter entrance. Inside, Chief Warrant Officer Aaron Caldwell was already reviewing radar logs, verifying tracking fidelity, ensuring no anomalies were missed in the chaos. Staff Sergeant Morgan Blake was recalibrating launch systems, preparing for the possibility that the next wave could come before midnight. Sergeant First Class Danielle Cross moved from soldier to soldier, checking hydration, posture, focus. Quiet leadership continuing even after the threat had passed. Specialist Ava Collins scanned updated intelligence feeds, comparing satellite imagery to confirm no hidden preparations were underway. Not one of them asked how it would look in the morning report. Not one of them asked who would get credit. They asked for updated threat projections. They asked about sector overlap adjustments. They asked whether additional munitions resupply would be needed before sunrise. That is professionalism. That is service. What we had done would never appear dramatic from a distance. There would be no visible battlefield, no captured terrain, no enemy formations retreating. There would only be the absence of destruction. Thousands of Americans would move through their routines the next day because a handful of soldiers, women in uniform entrusted with responsibility, had calculated, decided, and acted under pressure. The sky above us slowly returned to darkness, but I knew something had shifted. The first day of war had tested our systems. It had tested our endurance. It had tested my command. And when it ended, Alpha Battery was still standing, not because of luck, not because of symbolism, but because training, discipline, and trust held when it mattered most. That is what victory looks like in air defense. It looks like nothing happened. And that is everything. War does not measure you by what you meant to do. It measures you by what you were prepared to do when the moment arrived. In the quiet hours after the all clear, when reports were filed and intercept logs archived, I sat alone for a few minutes inside the shelter that had felt like the center of the world just hours earlier. The equipment still hummed, screens still glowed. But the urgency had drained away, leaving only reflection. That night, readiness had a face. It looked like Chief Warrant Officer Aaron Caldwell refusing to blink while the radar picture multiplied. It looked like Staff Sergeant Morgan Blake shaving fractions of seconds off launch sequencing, because she knew fractions decide outcomes. It looked like Sergeant First Class Danielle Cross steadying younger soldiers with nothing more than a calm voice and absolute confidence in their training. It looked like Specialist Ava Collins Cross checking intelligence feeds until uncertainty narrowed into clarity. It looked like Major Catherine Doyle granting engagement authority without hesitation because she trusted her battery commanders. It looked like Colonel Rebecca Shaw maintaining composure across an entire brigade while the sky above us filled with fire. It looked like women in uniform doing exactly what they were trained to do, not as a statement, as soldiers entrusted with responsibility. Command is not loud. It does not come with music or applause. It is a series of decisions made in seconds, each one carrying consequences measured in lives. You do not feel heroic when you make them. You feel accountable. That night, I did not feel pride when the intercept struck true. I felt relief. Relief that the math held. Relief that the training worked. Relief that thousands of Americans would never know how close they had come to waking up in chaos. I did not save them alone. Air defense is layered for a reason. Authority flows through ranks for a reason. Trust is built long before the first alarm sounds. We did it together. Disciplined, prepared, unseen. Somewhere farther south, another installation absorbed a strike before its systems reached full readiness. Their casualties weighed on all of us. War is never clean. It never spares everyone. Success in one sector does not erase loss in another. That reality sharpens the lesson. You do not control when conflict begins. You control whether you are ready when it does. Gender did not change the radar picture. It did not alter the intercept geometry. It did not shorten the response window. What mattered was competence. What mattered was discipline. What mattered was the willingness to shoulder responsibility when hesitation would have been easier. When responsibility calls, courage does not ask who you are. It asks whether you will stand. That night we stood. And somewhere right now in another desert, on another ship, inside another command post, someone else is standing watch while the rest of the country sleeps. If this story reminded you what service truly looks like, subscribe to Stories of Service and tell me where you're watching from. Because readiness never rests.